Perhaps you've heard the term wrestling with God. And you go, well, what is that all about? Well, I've had times when I have wrestled with God because I wasn't in the will of God. And I wasn't listening in tune to his voice. And there was a stirring in my soul. And God was pulling me one direction, and I was bound and determined to go in the other. And that's exactly what we find here in the book of Jonah, in the first chapter, after they had woke him up, and they cast lots and determined that it was his God that was causing all this disturbance with the wind and the tempest. And they said to Jonah, he says, well, what are we going to do? And Jonah said, just throw me overboard. Just throw me overboard and everything will be fine. Well, they didn't want to do that because I'm just going to say, well, these men were men of conscience. And they didn't want to just throw one of their passengers out into the sea, into the peril. And so it says here in the 13th verse of the first chapter of Jonah, it says they rowed and they wrestled all during the night. They wrestled and they rowed. And we're talking about rowed the boat. They rowed the boat and they wrestled against the wind and the tempest and the storm, but they could not prevail. And I just looked at that and I said, been there in my life where I've just wrestled with God. And the thing about it is that the more you wrestle, the worse the situation will become. The harder everything comes against you. And the thing is, Jonah, he wanted to be out of the presence of God. Well, he wasn't totally out of the presence of God, but he was out of the protection of God. And he was in great peril here, along with everybody on the ship. And then finally, after a very difficult time of wrestling against the storms, wrestling against God, these mariners, they just finally came to the conclusion that there was just no way that they were going to win against God. And, hey, let me tell you something. The sooner you learn that, the better things will be. And again, I have to just be honest with you that I've had those times in my life when I've just wrestled with God, and there's just something that I wanted it to be, and I wanted it to be this way, but it wasn't God's way. And the storm just continued to blow. But in those times, when we finally come to the reality that God has a plan, and he'll work his plan in his time, and we submit to that, there will come a peace. And I've had it happen in my life when I finally just laid it down, just laid the burden down and said, God, I'm tired of this wrestling. Lord, I want to do it your way, and just surrender to that. And God just brings a wonderful peace. And that's what he did when they finally threw him overboard. This is Pastor Jack King with the gospel on the radio broadcast.